I don't think God is partisan, but I don't think he's neutral on the issues either. He gave us a book.
Nick Freitas is now with us.
Not conservative enough, Grandpa.
Some guests walk in carrying notes. Nick Freitas walks in carrying a mug.
If they tread around, they will in fact find out.
And somehow, that mug has become as famous as the man himself.
We win that unless we screw it up. And let me tell you how we will screw it up.
I came to stand on what's still right.
It is evil to kill babies in the womb. It is evil to encourage and assist kids in transitioning their genders.
Being satisfied with what's comfortable instead of what's true is what's gotten us to this point.
Rise like fire.
What the hell do we do?
It's about time we be bold and unapologetic about what we believe.
How do we get back to peaceful coexistence?
We woke up to that reality because Charlie got murdered, and then the left came out in massive amounts of numbers and celebrated it.
And there's been a lot of times where we've sat here politely and just took it. Mr. Speaker, not this time.
We are fighting a war, but our weapon is the gun.
If you want to fix the country, you fix the faith issue in this country.
When that's your weapon, that's a war I'm willing to fight any day.
Masculinity is about strength and competence.
A lot to react to there.
You're being lied to about what that actually does to your kids and your relationship with your kids.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. How they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because it sure is the proof. Ay, we the people like Garcia, so that's no excuse.
You know, some guests walk in carrying notes. Others bring research. Nick Freitas walks in carrying a mug. And somehow, that mug has become as famous as the man himself. It's part branding, part cultural weapon. And maybe that's exactly what this country needs right now. A dose of common sense served hot with a side of humor. Because if you can't laugh while the world burns, you'll end up screaming into the flames. Nick's a Green Beret, a husband, a father, a patriot, a man who spent a career not just fighting for what's right, but reminding us why it's right. He's become a voice for people who still believe faith, family, and freedom are worth defending. Not hashtags, not slogans, but sacred responsibilities. And in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, a moment that rattled the conservative world to its core, Nick said something that stopped me cold. We finally woke up to what this fight really is. He didn't mean politics. He meant a moral reckoning, a line in the sand where battle isn't left versus right anymore. It's good versus evil. Because let's be honest, if it's evil to kill babies in the womb, it's evil to push children into confusion and call it compassion. Somewhere along the way, we crossed a bridge from disagreement to darkness. And now, as a nation, we have to decide whether we keep walking deeper into it or turn back towards the light. But this show isn't about despair, it's about renewal. Asking how we come back as parents, as patriots, as people of faith when the world says it's too late. So today we're going to talk about the turning point, about righteous anger and moral prudence, about young people who inherit this country and the comfort crisis that's robbing them of resilience, about a rising revival in America where Bible sales are up, worship music is trending, and maybe, just maybe, faith is finding its voice again. We'll talk about parenting through chaos, leading with conviction, and yes, we'll even find out which mug Nick Freitas brought to the fight today. Because this isn't just an interview, it's a conversation about what kind of America our kids will inherit, and whether we still have the courage to love her enough to tell her the truth. Nick Freitas, welcome to We the People.
Oh, thank you for having me on. And here we go. I got my mug right here.
Yeah, so probably the most important question I have of the whole interview is what mug are we drinking from today? But as you tell us that, walk us through the mug story and sort of how that became your thing.
Yeah, that was never planned. So this is my Washington crossing the Delaware mug, which I don't know, seems appropriate as that was a turning point in the American Revolution. But here's what happened. One day I was just going out on my front porch. I was going to say something kind of snarky, and I had my coffee with me. I was like, oh, I'll just, take a drink of my coffee, kind of like that, with the Kermit the Frog meme, where he's like, oh, it's none of my business, right? So I did that as just kind of a joke. And I think I must have done it like once or twice, mainly because the time that I did, I was on my front porch in the morning with my coffee. And then I did several more reels where I did essentially the same thing, but without my mug. And the comments section just filled up with, dude, where's the mug? And then people started sending me mugs. I was like, okay, the mug is the thing now. And I will now find myself in the airport where someone will be looking at me and go, do I know you from somewhere? And I'll always be like, imagine I had a coffee mug with a snarky maroon. I'm like, you're the coffee mug guy. So yeah, I never set out in life to be the coffee mug guy. But here we are.
Well, you didn't ask me to plug anything, but I will say that you have a website where we can buy mugs, we can buy T-shirts. So what is your favorite mug that you have?
My favorite mug is probably it's kind of the iconic one where we did the the Gadsden flag, the "Don't Tread on Me," except we did "Tread Around and Find Out," and so that's been kind of our our signature mug that we have. But personally, my favorite one is my. We have a couple of ones we did for like married couples. So I have one that says, my wife is hotter than my coffee. And then I have another one that says, my wife is my cardio. So.
You stole my thunder because that is my favorite mug that you have. And I think I might buy myself that for Mother's Day and drink from it every day. All right. So that's some fun stuff. And anybody that follows you on social media can't scroll without getting a good laugh. But you do something that this show does a lot. We take the issues seriously. We just don't always take ourselves seriously. I think that humor and comedy can sort of make things more relatable. It can be more inviting for people to have a conversation. But look, a conversation with you right now at this moment in time needs to be serious because you have a lot of serious things to say. And, we're sort of in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. And I think we'll be in this wake for a very long time. And I think that there are appropriate things that we need to realize about this moment and not lose the momentum, the unfortunate momentum that it puts us on. But before we sort of talk about what to do with this, I want to just sort of talk about it because you've had a lot of interesting things to say about it. One thing you're good at is sort of taking something that everybody else is saying and saying it differently. You called his assassination a moment that opened our eyes. You said it was the day when we finally woke up to what this fight really is. So, Nick, I'd like you to sort of talk about what this fight is. And do you fear, because we all want to say it's a war, and I say that too. I'm not opposed to that term, but I worry that our side needs to sort of promote the moral high ground. We can't stoop to their level. So do you worry that we do risk losing the higher moral ground when we call this a war? And how do we calibrate righteous anger with prudence?
I think we need to understand that there's a difference between physical war, what we might call intellectual war, and what we would call spiritual war. And I'm not saying that we're in a war right now, which means that, okay, it's open season on our political opponents because after all, they're the enemies in like a physical sense. What I am saying, and what actually when I wrote that on the day Charlie was murdered, the Speaker of the House of Virginia took me to task for it, or at least he made an attempt at it. And I said, no, this is a war between two diametrically opposed worldviews. And that's what I said. I didn't say go out and beat up somebody that, votes differently than you. I certainly didn't say murder someone that shows up to a college campus and talks with you. I said it's a war between diametrically opposed worldviews, and I believe it is. And he goes, well, that can't be the case. That can't be the case. So really? Okay. Well, then you show me the world where you guys are in charge and you're not allowing babies to be murdered in the womb through all 9 months of pregnancy. You're not encouraging gender-confused 10-year-olds to take chemical castration medicine. You are not encouraging 16-year-old gender-confused kids to get mutilating surgery that will impact them for the rest of their lives. You're not trying to systematically disarm me. You're not trying to constantly control my children's education, what it looks like to turn it from something that should be reading, writing, arithmetic, something that hopefully we can all agree on, into something that is clearly ideological. Show me a world where that exists with you guys in charge, and I will start to believe that, hey, we can just peacefully coexist and there's no problems here. But I've been in the legislature for 10 years. I know that's not the case. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise. That's what this really comes down to. I didn't treat them like my enemy. They treated me like their enemy. And I just stopped disagreeing. I stopped playing make-believe. Because one of the things we used to say in the military, whenever you were planning an operation, is the enemy gets a say. You can plan everything as beautifully as you want, but they're not obliged to act in a way that you anticipate or you predict or that you would like. And again, when I say my enemy, I want to make this part really, really clear. One of the things that Charlie Kirk did, I think, a very excellent job on is differentiating between the ideology that he was fighting and the spiritual component of this that he was fighting. The concept of our fight is not against flesh and blood, and separating that from the flesh and blood human being created in the image of God, right? I don't make that distinction because I find it politically convenient. I make that distinction because God commands me to make that distinction in the Bible. Specifically, we can talk about Romans chapter 12, where it says that I'm supposed to bless those who curse me. I'm supposed to love my enemies. Christ commands us to love our enemies. Feed your enemy when they're hungry. Give your enemy something to drink when they're thirsty. It commands us very specifically to not be overcome by evil, but to overcome evil with good. Now, here's the part that I need people to understand. It also says in verse 9 of Romans chapter 12 to abhor evil, right? Not tolerate it, not accommodate it, not make common cause with it, abhor it, right? When it says overcome evil with good, not overcome evil with niceness, not overcome evil with tolerance. And so I think it's about time. I think when I say that we've woken up to what this fight was, I don't just mean we woke up to that reality because Charlie got murdered. We woke up to that reality because Charlie got murdered, and then the left came out in massive amounts of numbers and celebrated it. That's where we all saw people that we knew, people that we were related to, people that we considered friends, who could not contain their glee about a man getting murdered in public for having conversations on a college campus. And that was the part where, again, they've been calling us enemies for a long time. We just stopped disagreeing. And that doesn't make us the bad guy. That doesn't deprive us of the moral high ground. If anything, it once again reinvigorates us to remember what this is. It is a fight, and you better be fighting from the moral high ground. You don't get to give up the moral high ground in order to fight. And I'm just tired of people. They just want to get back to what's comfortable. Being satisfied with what's comfortable instead of what's true is what's gotten us to this point. And it's about time we be bold and unapologetic about what we believe, not just in what we say and articulate, but also with the way that we conduct ourselves and how we live, because that's ultimately what's going to pull people over to our way of thinking. I never lose sight of this. Because for those of us that have been in this fight for a long time and we feel like we've been intellectually consistent, not perfect, but intellectually consistent and faithful, it's important to remember that arguably the best evangelist outside of Jesus Christ was a man that used to persecute the church. And so I always keep in mind that as much as I get frustrated with people on the other side of this ideological war, that for all I know, there could be someone out there who celebrated Charlie Kirk's murder, who mocked Erica, who did all of this, who at one point is going to have that encounter with God that just changes absolutely everything, and they end up becoming the most powerful advocate for Christ and the values associated with that.
I like some of the, I like everything you said there, but you sort of changed my perspective on a way to have this conversation. We are fighting a war, but our weapon is good. Our weapon is the good. And when that's your weapon, that's a war I'm willing to fight any day. And that's the most powerful weapon in the bag. You said some other things. You sort of define this good versus evil. We always hear left versus right, but I do think we've moved into good versus evil. It is evil to kill babies in the womb. Mm-hmm. It is evil to encourage and assist kids in transitioning their genders. Now, I'm 40 years old, right? And I read history going back to the Roman Empire, right? And to the founding of this country. And, we hear history repeats itself. And, it seems naive every time somebody says, well, this is the first time it's been like this, because you can always go back and find similar times. But I'm telling you, Nick, it feels like in my lifetime, good versus evil is more prevalent than ever. So my question to you is, if that is true, if we are in this good versus evil in a different way we have been before, when did it change?
I don't think it's ever changed so much as it has just become more apparent and more prominent. But if I had to point to certain things, or if I had to point to a distinction, what's something that's a fight potentially between left and right that is not a fight between good and evil? We can debate speed limits, right? We can debate infrastructure projects. Should the road go there or should the road go there? Right. These are things that are, there may be certain moral implications, because there's always moral implications, right? But if you choose path A versus path B, that's not necessarily a good versus evil dichotomy. But whenever we start to take issues which do have very, very deep moral implications, and I would argue obvious moral implications, and now we make that the issue, well, then now all of a sudden this becomes very easy. The way I like to put it, because we've had a lot of pastors in the West that have felt like, well, I don't want to bring politics into the church. Well, I got news for you, man. Politics invaded, whether you liked it or not. And so the real question is this. I don't think God is partisan, but I don't think he's neutral on the issues either. He gave us a book, right? And the book's not neutral on the issues. And so really this comes down to understanding that a major political party in our country has taken things which our faith says are immoral. They should not be done. And they have not just said, we're going to allow this to happen because it's not the role of the civil authorities, right? That might have been a neutral ground where we could have said, okay, look, there's some behaviors that Scripture says is wrong, but we understand that for practical reasons would be impossible to enforce, or could include so much state power that it would be inappropriate to do that. For instance, Bible says don't get drunk. Okay, great. Are we going to allow the police to come into your house all hours of the day to make sure that you're not getting drunk? No. Right? That's not a good use case. That's impractical. But when it comes to things like, should you be allowed to destroy innocent human life because you find it inconvenient? No, I don't. I'm not only going to allow you to be neutral on that issue, but you're elevating the issue. You're using my taxpayer dollars, my tax dollars, to subsidize this process. Right? You're using my tax dollars to subsidize the trans ideology. You're using my tax dollars to push these certain answers to these ideological questions within the public school system. So it's not as if we're saying, look, the civil authorities are going to handle these things, and we're going to leave these things up to individual choices, and people can make decisions on who they want to associate with, who they want to go to church with, who they want to marry. Over here, not in the civil realm. No, they brought all of those things into the civil realm and then insisted that we comply, and then they insisted that we celebrate, and then they insisted that we subsidize. So no, we're not the ones that asked for this fight in this manner. They decided to bring this into this particular realm, and I think that constitutes a very clear distinction from a world where people with different worldviews or different faiths could say, look, we disagree on these things, but I'm going to let you live according to your faith. I'm going to live according to mine. We're not going to interfere on things with each other. Because again, as Christians, I'm not allowed to spread the gospel through the sword, right? I have to convince you, right? God is the only one that had authority to compel you to believe in him, and he gave you the freedom to choose. So far be it from me to try to assume authority God did not assume for himself, even though he has it, right? So I think that's probably the biggest distinction that I would point to say that's where the good and evil starts, is when a major party or institution starts to now take things that do belong to the sacred and try to essentially turn it on its head, and then force you to participate.
Hey guys, it's Gates. Thanks for tuning in. I'm asking you to like, share, and subscribe to the show. I hear that all the time when I watch and listen to podcasts. And now that I have a show, I know the difference that it makes. It really does boost us in the algorithm. And the better we do in the algorithm, the better guests we're going to get, the better content we're going to be able to produce. This show is not mine, it's yours. So in a way, you're helping yourself. So please like, share, and subscribe, and God bless. It's so funny you bring up the separation of church and state. I'm a member of a very, very vibrant Catholic church and Catholic community here in Tampa. And inevitably there's one or two, maybe three sort of liberals in our community. And I always say, they're mutually exclusive. You can't be both. You cannot be a liberal and a Catholic. So choose which one you want to be, because they don't work well together. They're differing. They're extremely opposing ideologies. So you talk about separating church and state. Well, in a lot of ways, the Venn diagram's a circle when you sort of get into the ideology and the Bible and all that. So Nick, a broad question, right? I want to sound super intelligent asking you this, but I can't find another way other than to say, what the hell do we do? How do we get back to peaceful coexistence? And you brought it up, we don't have to agree. We also don't have to take each other's heads off. How do we get there, Nick?
Well, I think at this point, the ideology that has to lose is what we would call a critical theory-based ideology, or the more colloquial term is a woke-based ideology. And that's an ideology which essentially looks at the world, says that everything is about power structures, and it's all about helping marginalized people, or who they categorize as marginalized people, take over those power structures in order to achieve greater equity. But equity for them is not equity as we would see it as a fair and just outcome. Equity for them is they control the power structures in order to achieve the political, ideological, and moral end states that they desire, which are directly opposed to Christianity, directly opposed to some of what we would call the positive traditions within the classical liberal tradition, things like property rights and things of that nature. And so If we can understand that that ideology not only has end states which are completely contradictory to what we want, and that they're not willing to leave you alone. Like this whole idea of, I once explained it this way to a colleague that was a socialist. And I said, look, good news. Because you live in the United States, if you and thousands of your friends all want to get together, buy a bunch of property, own everything in common, and live out the Marxist ideology, you can. And not only will I not bother you, I'll try to lower your taxes, right? I won't bother you at all. You just can't force me to come with you, and you can't force me to subsidize your decisions. And that's not good enough for you, right? That's it. Now here's my other question. If you're in charge and I decide, you know what, hey, this whole communism thing is great for you guys, but I want to go get a bunch of my friends together, buy some property and live as with property rights and markets and stuff. Am I allowed to do that? Oh no, you kill me. You confiscate my property. So you're the violent ones, not me, and you're the ones imposing your worldview, not me. So once we acknowledge that they are proposing a worldview which, as Christians, we cannot find acceptable. And by the way, you don't got to love the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party, or like you don't got to do that. But you can't make common cause with a political institution which is directly advocating for things that violate your faith. That's a contradiction. Sorry. So that's step one. Step two is understanding the other nature of critical theory and what makes it different from what you might call kind of maybe more traditional left-wing or Democrat politics, is they essentially deny the concept of objective truth and objective morality. Well, if you deny those two things, here's what ends up happening. All of the other processes that we use to arrive at reasonable conclusions can now be instantly thrown out the window. It's why people will get so frustrated and will say, well, look, I just want to make a logical argument. You called me a racist. I want to use the definition of racism, and then I want to use the laws of logic, the law of identity, the law of the excluded middle, the law of non-contradiction, and I want to use facts and evidence to arrive at a conclusion to determine whether or not I'm a racist. And then when I've presented sufficient evidence and a logically consistent argument to demonstrate that I'm not, you're then going to acknowledge, oh, I was mistaken. You're actually not a racist. They don't accept it. The fact that you used logic, right? Well, that's just a Western power structure that was utilized in order to help the oppressors continue to oppress the oppressed. And so I don't accept your use of logic. And again, for anybody that thinks I'm being hyperbolic here, go look at what they put up at the Smithsonian in the Museum of African American History. There was this big thing, attributes of whiteness. And among the attributes of whiteness was the scientific method and linear thinking. First of all, I had no idea that was a white invention, right? We didn't invent these things. These are things that we discovered. These are truths about reality that we discovered, adopted, maybe gave names to, but ultimately they don't belong to any one race of people. That's actually a rather racist way to look at it. And yet they can say this. So they can say something that we would all say, well, that's contradictory. Well, your reliance on the law of non-contradiction shows that you're still consumed by this, white power structure. How do I even debate with that? You show me the way I can civilly debate with somebody that is willing, that has fully given themselves over to that sort of ideology where heads they win, tails I lose. They accuse me of something, and if I accept it, I'm a bad guy. Or if I contradict it, the fact that I contradict it is evidence that I'm a bad guy. So there is no peaceful coexistence with that worldview. It will eventually achieve enough power to where it can either isolate you or punish you, right, or harm you. So I think if we recognize, okay, that has to go away. Now, if Bill Maher and I want to have a discussion about whether or not God exists, or if Bill Maher and I want to discuss what the top marginal tax rate should be, fine, we can have those discussions because we recognize that there's such a thing as truth, objective truth, and morality. But anybody that is willing to throw those things out has essentially set up an unfalsifiable worldview where now there is no evidence that I can present to them that will satisfy their demands, because ultimately their demands are compliance and domination.
A lot to react to there. First of all, I just recently read a book called The War on the Past, and it essentially goes back and has shown how pretty much everything from history has become racist. And we've seen the obvious things of people tearing down statues of Americans that have, weathered the country through various storms. But they came up, math is racist. Certain names of flowers were racist. I mean, the book's serious, but I found myself sort of like cracking up as I was reading it. And then the other thing you said was about sort of this, these socialists they have the ability in this country to go sort of start a community and live the way they want to live. They can pretty much only do that in America. There are not many countries that give people the freedom of choice, the freedom of exercise to go do those things. And yet this is the country, the one that allows them to have those freedoms that they're willing to tear down. So it's very hard, as you say, to change the minds of grown adults. It's easier to shape the minds of young people. And I want to turn our conversation that way. I want to talk about young people because I think the succession plan for America is young people. I think Charlie Kirk, the martyr that he was on that course to change the trajectory of kids walking off of college campuses. And we've got to pick up that baton and carry it forward. So I want to ask you what your message is to young people, because their main source of news is social media, and their cultural consumption habits are so different than the generation before them. I mean, we've moved from shaping ideologies to simply confirming them. A young person can go on social media with whatever ideology they have in their head and continue to scroll until that worldview, that ideology is confirmed. How do we reach these people with a message of faith, family, freedom, the true, the good, and the beautiful?
Well, I mean, we have some people that think we should just, not be on certain platforms because they don't like them or they think they're damaging. The bottom line is that a social media platform can be damaging. There's no question. But a lot of platforms are essentially a tool, and that tool can be used for good or it can be used for evil. And if you are going to just cede a culturally shaping institution to the left or to atheist culture, well, then don't be surprised when you get a lot more secular atheists and leftists. And so I think you have to go in and identify what sort of culturally shaping institutions you're willing to actually compete for. Now, what's interesting is with social media, when it comes to like legacy media or academia, you are far less likely to find anything resembling a Christian or conservative opinion within mainstream media or academia than you are on social media. Social media is still a very, very competitive environment. In fact, you could arguably, you would say that as the moment Elon Musk bought X and no longer started censoring conservatives started dominating that platform. Was it because Elon all of a sudden gave us advantages and started like censoring the left? No, we didn't need him to censor the left. We just needed a somewhat level playing field. And the moment we had it, we started to win the conversation. And so again, it's important to understand that part of the strategy, and this is, we could talk forever about guys like Antonio Gramsci, Herbert Marcuse, Jean-Paul Sartre, all these guys. These guys set up this concept, especially Gramsci, with this idea of the long march through the institutions. And it was, how does the left take over culturally shaping institutions and then exclude the right and then become the predominant worldview along every category? And they've largely been successful in order to do that because we've been a little bit asleep at the wheel and haven't bothered to actually compete in some of these things. Well, now we have a mechanism to compete on social media, and we should certainly use it. When it comes to young people, here's the part that young people are actually what makes me confident about our future. And I know this sounds bizarre to a lot of people. If you poll young men right now, young men in America, they are more conservative than they've been since we started asking these specific poll questions in the 70s. And here's what I mean by that. Typically speaking, the most conservative person in your family is grandpa or your great uncle, right? So I want you to imagine going to Thanksgiving dinner coming up next month, right? You're going to Thanksgiving dinner, you got the family around the table, and there is grandpa with his, Korean War hat or his Vietnam War hat and his American flag t-shirt, and with Donald Trump saying, fight, 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 going, we need to save this country and the whole deal. And then his 18-year-old grandson looks at him and goes, not conservative enough, Grandpa. That's the reality. It is under 20 young men are polling more conservative and more religious than ever. When you ask young men, they gave 12 different categories. They asked young men and women who voted for Harris, young men and women who voted for Trump. When you ask young men who voted for Trump, what is their top priority of the 12 categories that they give them? The number one priority was having kids, having a family. So you've got a generation of young men that are more conservative than they've ever been, are now becoming more religious or curious about religious than they've ever been, and their number one priority is to start a family. We win that unless we screw it up. And let me tell you how we will screw it up if we don't get our crap together. these young men recognize that they have seen a world that has turned on them, that has told them that their masculinity is toxic, that has told them that all these instincts that God has put them in there are wrong. And for a while there, the only guys that would stick up for them were like Andrew Tate. Right? And when they walk into their church, what would they hear? They'd hear the feminization of the church. It was the same narrative. Men are all bad. Women are all great. Men do better. And then what did they see when they walked into church? They saw weak, lazy, fat men. And they didn't want to be that. But now, because of guys like Charlie Kirk and because of others, guys like Chad Robichaud, John Lovell, and Victor Marks, and other guys like this, they're starting to say, look, I know the world is screwed up, and I'm looking for, I want something true. I want something meaningful. I want something that I can get genuine identity and purpose in. There's something missing from my life, and I'm going to check out faith for the first time. What are they going to find when they walk into our churches? Because I will tell you this, if they find strong men of God, they're going to stay, they're going to learn, they're going to get discipled. And if you want to fix the country, you fix the faith issue in this country. You fix the family. You fix those things, we win. We win. Because ultimately, elections are numbers games. And the left is aborting their children. They're aborting their children, and they're waiting until 40 to have them, and they're trying to have them at $25,000 a pop through IVF, and it ain't taken. Conservatives, on the other hand, are having kids. So that's where this starts. So I am very, very confident that we are at a critical moment in our time. I think Charlie Kirk has set us up to really turn things around, but we have got to be showing up in our churches, providing mentorship and discipleship to a generation of young men that want to be good, want to be honorable, want to be strong, want to be capable, want to be competent. And if they find such men in their churches, that's where they're going to stay and learn.
Man, Nick, you took the words out of my mouth, because I always love hearing and seeing the charts of the amount of children that conservatives have versus the amount of children that liberals have. We are outnumbering them in droves. So you're right. It is a numbers game, and we just have to have the long-term gratification to continue to make these investments in our children. My wife is pregnant with our fourth. I'd love to have 1 million kids. I think kids are the greatest thing in the world. And then you sort of talk about the church and the home. I mean, the home is the domestic church. So we need to make sure that there's a two-way street here. We talk about faith all the time on this show, that, you know, they need to get the right example in church, and then they need to see church in the home. And so we have a role in the home to be ministers of the faith. So all that is good news with our youth. And I know the numbers you're talking about, and I'm encouraged by those, but there are still a couple things that sort of concern me about the younger generation. And I want to sort of address that through a story that I saw you give on YouTube to a group of young children, young kids, I should say, young adults. You discussed your grandfather going off to World War II at the age of 16. I mean, one of the bloodiest wars we've ever seen. I mean, this is hand-to-hand combat at sometimes. And you say, you know, it was just something you did. You didn't question it. And why? Because you loved your country. And that made me sort of think of two things. Regardless of all the things we just talked about, which are true, I do see a little bit of a loss of love of country. And I want to get that back. And I also see kids living through a comfort crisis. They're not going off to war at 16. And I'm not making the case that you have to go off to war to sort of escape the comfort crisis. But every day we wake up in the United States of America, life gets a little bit easier. And I think when you have dirt under your fingernails and you have skin in the game and you see the fruits of that, returning from war, a hard day's work, you do love this country more. So Nick, sort of I don't know if it's a two-part question or two questions in one. How do we rebuild a love of country? And how do we get our youth out of this comfort crisis and doing hard things again?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to recognize, and people get frustrated with me because they don't think it's a necessary component, and I'm here to tell you it absolutely is. John Adams said that our Constitution was written for a moral and religious people and is totally unsuited to the government of any other. And he's right. There's no amount of political structure or, country history that is going to give you the United States that we know and love and want to see continue without a foundation on something transcendent, and specifically Christianity. And so I think recapturing love of faith is essential to actually recapturing something that we think was uniquely special about America. Because what was uniquely special about America was this idea that you not only had the right to, pursue happiness, but you had a responsibility to take responsibility for your own life, right? Your dreams were not the responsibility of someone else. The government was not there to take care of you. The government was protect your right to go out, to explore, to adventure, to learn, to grow, to build, right? That's what it was to do. And if you see that if you look at what that meant to be as an American, it mirrors very, very closely what you see in Genesis with God telling Adam, he didn't create a garden and then say, okay, lounge about all day. No, he said, go forth and multiply, take dominion, right? You had jobs, you had meaning, you had purpose. And that's what we need to get back to, is this idea of young men and women realizing, first and foremost, they're not supposed to be competitive with one another. They're cooperative with one another. They're collaborative with one another. They're meant to work together to achieve things, to grow forth, multiply, to take dominion. And dominion doesn't mean I'm a tyrannical ruler of my environment. What it means is that I am there to help build up, lift up, and create something within that environment that is worth preserving. And young men especially, I don't want to say this to the exclusion of young women, but specifically there's been a crisis of masculinity. Young men want to feel strong and capable, and they want to build something. They need challenges. Now, if you tell them consistently, don't do any of that stuff because that's all toxic, but here's some more video games to play, or here's some cheap dopamine hits with porn or whatever else. Yeah, you can get somebody to get addicted to something that is destructive for them. But that's not ultimately what they want. They're depressed when they give into that. What they want is challenges. And specifically, they want dangerous challenges. And I know this is true because I've done this probably 3 different times now, where I've stood in front of a group of young men. One was at Young America's Foundation. I was speaking at their men's luncheon. One was with 2 fraternities at University of Alabama. There was another place I just did it. And I'm looking at all these young men. And I say, okay, guys, I got a question for you. How many of you are interested in the military? Or a few hands, maybe. I remember one, it was probably 300 men in the room. Maybe, 20 hands went up out of 300. So how many are interested in politics? All the hands go up. Okay. I said, in my bio, they usually read off 3 things. They read off that I was a Green Beret combat veteran. They read off that I've been in the General Assembly for 10 years. And they read off that I'm a social media, influencer, entrepreneur, or whatever. What are you most impressed with? Every single man in the room says Green Beret combat veteran. I said, isn't that interesting? None of you in this room necessarily want to be a Green Beret, and yet that some of you do want to be elected officials. Some of you do want to be entrepreneurs. Some of you do want to be social. But the thing you're most impressed with is being a Green Beret combat veteran. Why? Because that is the credential that tells you that if something bad were to happen right now, where everything would be on the line, you feel reasonably confident I would know how to deal with that. And every single man wants that. Regardless of what you choose as a profession, regardless of what God calls you to do. God might never call you to pick up a weapon professionally, to fight professionally, but all of us have this yearning inside of us to be a strong man that the people we love could depend on in a dangerous situation. And so I think one of the most important things we need to recognize is that we need to get young men into this thing where it's like, you need to get physically fit, learn how to fight, learn how to shoot, learn how to do these things, not because they need to be professions, but because there's something inside you that will give you a degree of confidence that then go into other areas and chase down other challenges. And so whatever it is, it's about reclaiming this idea that masculinity is about strength and competence. It's also about, and John Lovell does an excellent job talking about this, it's also about being loving and tender and romantic, right? But some people get those things and other people get other things. And you need to be capable for both. And I think one of the things young men are looking for right now are more rites of passage. And the only one that can provide that to them is older men that have been through those rites of passages, that have proven themselves in a variety of situations, professionally, spiritually, intellectually, that are coming alongside and providing that proper mentorship and discipleship so that they can do difficult things when they're young, build up that appropriate confidence, and then point that confidence toward noble end states.
Rites of passage is the perfect term because, everybody thinks you become an adult the day you turn 18. That's simply a legal definition. Some people become an adult at 50 years old when they finally overcome an addiction. Some people become an adult at 13 years old when their parents die in a plane crash and they have to raise their siblings. So we do need to provide those rites of passage because that give someone experience, wisdom, accomplishment to know. It's one thing to know what an adult is. It's another thing to have the experience of being an adult. So I love that you brought up rites of passage. So I built this show on the backs of faith, family, and freedom. I think that's the 3-legged stool that supports the conservative movement. We've talked a lot about freedom. I want to ask you one more question about faith and then a couple questions about family. So there is really good news about faith, and you brought some of this up, but I want to give some more. There is definitely and finally a real religious revival in this country. Since 2022, Bible sales are up 22%. Since 2019, Religious app downloads are up 80%, and Spotify Christian music streams are up 50%. So, Nick, how do we leverage this religious revival for more productive and positive things?
Well, the first thing that we should recognize is that there's always going to be a response to it, right? It's like when things are going well, Satan's going to hit you. So just expect it. Don't think it's strange. Don't think it's, oh no, we're no. Your job is to keep focused on what you're supposed to be focused on. So each one of us, people, after Charlie was murdered, so many people are like, what do we do now? It's like, well, first thing you got to ask is, what is God calling you to do? What sort of giftings do you have? What sort of talents do you have? What are you passionate about? And then how are you using that to advance his kingdom, right? How are you doing that? To the extent that you are, here's what ends up happening. When Charlie was murdered, all of us were angry. And it was righteous anger. And anger is a powerful motivator, right? But it burns really, really hot and it exhausts you over time. The motivator which keeps you going no matter what is joy. And so a big part of this is about finding, what is my role? What is my place? What have I been put on this earth to do? And then going and doing it. Now, one of the things that has been essential for me in that is there's this Bible study called Experiencing God. And I have to tell you, one of the most, I don't like Bible studies that have workbooks. Right? I just don't. I'm just going to be honest. I feel like it's the police calling me up going, did you really do the reading? Did you fill out the obvious question? Like, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying I understand my own hang up with it. But there was this element in the Experiencing God handbook that I thought was just phenomenal. And it said that our proper role is not to go and seek out a noble mission and invite God to join us. It is to go ask God what he is doing and ask how we can join him. And I have learned the hard way that as a Christian, when you are seeking out to be obedient, and that's a word we kind of don't like in America, right? We don't like this idea of obedience. It feels like subservience. Well, it's not a bad thing to be obedient to God. Like that's not a bad thing at all. When you are seeking out to be obedience, there is a joy and a peace that comes with that allows you to endure. When scripture talks about the peace which surpasses all understanding, people are like, oh, great, how wonderful. And I'm like, read that more carefully. It's not the peace that everyone gets because everything's going great, right? Oh yeah, I'm comfortable and I'm wealthy and I'm secure. Like I have peace. Yeah, sure. No, it's the peace which surpasses all understanding, which implies that in the midst of conflict and chaos and danger, you have somehow got this peace that everyone else is looking around going, I don't understand this. And that presents the opportunity to point to Christ. And all I can tell people is that there are two things that I have really started to focus on. This obedience, which leads to that kind of peace in the midst of chaos and conflict. And again, in the midst of the storm, what is everyone looking for? A safe harbor. And if you represent the safe harbor, people are going to ask, why? First of all, they're going to run to you. And now they're going to ask, why am I here? Why is this safe? Oh, Christ, right? No, I don't believe that. Okay, fine. Go out and back to the storm. I'm telling you, Christ is what creates the safe harbor. You can go out to the storm if you want, or you can start to understand maybe there's something to this. Right? That's one aspect of it. It brings people in and attracts it. The other component is you look through this whole peace which surpasses all understanding and focus on is you are supposed to suffer for Christ. You're supposed to, right? Prosperity doctrine was one of the worst heresies ever because it led Christians to believe that as long as I'm doing everything right, only good things will happen. No, you can do things. If you were doing everything right in a society and culture which despises that which is right, which calls evil which calls good evil and evil good, you're going to have some difficulty. And you know what you should say when you feel that discomfort, or you feel some sort of persecution, or you feel some sort of even danger maybe for living out your values, your Christian values? You know what you should think to yourself? Thank God. Thank God that he deemed me worthy to suffer something on his behalf. How pathetic a life it would be to show up one day, stand before God and be like, really, just with everything that was going on in the world, nobody considered you a threat for my name, huh? Nobody.
Yeah. We always say, when you get to heaven, you should be exhausted.
Yeah. I want to, well, it's that thing where it's just, not to contradict you, I don't even want to think exhausted as much as I want to think I want to get more comfortable in the idea of discomfort. Like, well, Nick, you're not allowed to say that because you're a Christian. Okay, well, I'm going to say it anyways. Well, there's going to be consequences. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Please bring on the consequences. I want to be able to at least feel confident that when Christ told me to pick up my cross, I did. I didn't leave it sitting there because I thought it was too heavy.
Yeah.
Right.
And who suffered more but Jesus? I mean, he gave us the model of ultimate suffering, and it's okay for us to do our little part there. And the other thing, I love what you said about obedience bringing joy, because it sounds counterintuitive, but immediately I thought about my kids, 11, 8, and 5. You know what brings them joy? Keeping me happy. When daddy's happy, they're really happy. They love pleasing me. And what is the ultimate father-son, father-daughter relationship than our relationship with God? So obedience to God certainly brings me joy. And I've never heard it put the way you put it. So I appreciate you bringing that up. All right, let's round this conversation out with a couple parenting family issues. Take me inside the Freitas home. What does parenting your family look like? And throw me one or two contrarian parenting tips from your side of the camera.
Well, first of all, I could write one book on the things I did right, and I could write volumes on the things that I did wrong. And the reason why I say that is not just to be, kind of funny. I say that because I want people to understand that an imperfect yet faithful attempt to raise your children the way that God directs you to gets blessed exponentially. There are so many things I look back on where it's like, man, I screwed that up. And yet I have a great relationship with all three of my kids. I love all three of my kids. I'm very, very proud of their walk with Christ, the decisions they make, the personal responsibility they take for their own decisions and lives, all of it. And it's, people will ask me, oh, did you do this? Did you do this? Nope. No, I mean, I was in the military when all three of my kids were born. I missed like almost the entire first year of my youngest daughter's life, right? There's so many things like that were not ideal situations, but an imperfect yet faithful attempt to raise them in the way that they should go, as directed in Proverbs, produced exponential results. Okay, a couple things I'll say right off the bat. First of all, it becomes very, very easy when you have kids to start putting all the attention on the kids and forget about the attention about husband and wife. If you lose your marriage in pursuit of giving your kids everything that you think they need and want, you've actually deprived your kids of one of the most important things they need to see, which is a healthy relationship between not just mom and dad, but husband and wife. And so I would say it becomes more important to invest in your marriage after you have kids. Not that it's not important before, but even more important because they need to see something modeled for them. If they see a marriage that is modeled correctly for them, they will want it for themselves, and they will be able to properly identify the characteristics of a healthy, godly marriage. So that's absolutely critical. Another thing that I would say to moms and dads is there's this huge drive for you to have kids and then push them off to daycare or push them off to public school or whatnot. Horrible incentive structure. You're being lied to about what that actually does to your kids and to your relationship with your kids, okay? One of the greatest things that my wife and I did, and we never set out to do it initially when we got married, was we homeschooled. We did it first out of necessity, then we did it to protect him from what was going on in the school system, and then we did it because we absolutely loved it. And one of the reasons why we loved it is because we recaptured all of this time with our kids that we would have thousands of hours with our kids. And a lot of parents will say, oh my gosh, I can't imagine having all that time with your kids. Yeah, you don't like hanging out with your kids as much because you send them off to a government institution, which more than likely doesn't agree with your values, is teaching them something very different. And even if you do have good teachers and a good school and a good curriculum, there's still hundreds, if not thousands of other students there with very, very different influences. And so now your kids are growing apart from you at the same time that they're being taught that you are not a primary educator in their life. That's something for government experts to do. Well, and then you're shocked that you don't get along with your kids? Why would you? Right? You should be more shocked that you do get along with them. But once you take control over that area, and by the way, that doesn't mean you can't use other people to help educate your kids. I know my wife and I did all the time. But once we reassume that authority as a primary educator in our kids, because nobody loves our kids more than we do, all of a sudden we bought all this time back. We had all these kind of really cool experiences with one another. We got to protect them from things. We didn't protect them from the whole world, right? But We get to protect them from the things, and then they got to take age-appropriate risks and challenges that we get to guide them through. So when they were ready to launch, they were totally ready. They knew what they believed. It wasn't mom and dad's faith. It was their faith. It wasn't mom and dad's worldview. It was their worldview. They felt confident, not because they'd never fallen down, not because they never had problems, but because we properly educated them through the way of doing that, because we got to be there as they went through a lot of this. And so I would strongly, strongly encourage people to, regardless of what your situation is, never surrender that authority for being a primary educator within your child's life. So those are two things that I would say I look back on now and I'm like, that was it. My wife and I modeled a marriage where, my wife and I would argue with each other sometimes in front of the kids, but we would do it respectfully so they could see conflict resolution. My wife and I flirted in front of our kids so they saw that mom and dad were still hot for one another, right, in an appropriate way. And we recaptured that time, and we ensured that we had ample opportunity to be able to share our values with our kids and challenge them on those things without having to compete with another authority structure that was diametrically opposed to us. And so all of that, I think, set us up for great success within the family and a great relationship with your kids.
I'm all for removing barriers between me and my children. My wife is on the Florida State Board of Education, and so we have a master class in the education system in the state of Florida. My wife is a career educator, so all the respect in the world for how we educate our children. And then on the marriage front, I'll tell you that my wife and I like to say that we have two marriages. We have our marriage before kids and we have our marriage with kids, and they look very different. I remember my oldest, she's 11, is a girl, obviously. And I got some advice when we found out that we were pregnant with a girl. And it was that expect her first boyfriend that she brings home to be a lot like you. If you're a jerk to her and your mother, then if her boyfriend's a jerk, don't be surprised and don't be mad at that. But if you model what true masculinity and what a man should look like as a provider and with a relationship with a woman looks like, that's who she is conditioned to know as what a man is supposed to be. So that has totally, not that I had a bad relationship with my wife, but it's certainly made me think differently about, one, my relationship with my wife, and then two, how I present my relationship to my wife in front of my children. So one more question on sort of the parenting realm, and then I'll get you out of here on a broader question. So how do we, and by we I mean you, talk to our kids about these crazy times? And the first time I really thought about it was when the day Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I was home, I was watching the news coverage, and my daughter walked in the room, and it was very clear what had happened. And she started asking me some questions, and I want my kids to know what we're up against. I want them to know what our values are and how we promote those values in the world, but I don't want to strike fear in them so much that they retreat. So how do you walk that balancing act between teaching your kids about the times we're in and then also how to appropriately react to them?
So I think a couple of things works really well for this. One is we need to make sure that, I used to say age appropriate. I think a better term is maturity appropriate. So some children just kind of develop intellectually a little bit faster than others, and they may be picking up on things that, my gosh, I never would have thought my 11-year-old would pick up on. And so part of it is asking questions. So one of the benefits of asking questions and open-ended questions that allow them to elaborate and share their thoughts with you is that you kind of figure out what level of processing they're at and what they understand. And it also gives you some indication on how you can guide them through thinking about something that, tragic like this that takes place. And then the other part is also, again, we're commanded to not have a spirit of fear. That doesn't mean fear doesn't exist. It just means it doesn't come from God, right? So letting our kids know that, look, fear's out there and fear's going to knock at the door sometimes, but we're commanded to talk about the hope that is in us. And that's going to be reflected. They're going to believe that, one, when you tell that to them, but also when it's reflected in the way you behave. If you guys are constantly like, oh my gosh, I'm so worried and what's going to happen next? Well, then I don't care what you told them. If you told them not to have a spirit of fear, but then you displayed a spirit of fear, they're going to get attacked with that. So I think part of it is seeing the confidence in your answers. And this is one of the reasons, too, why I tell parents that, look, it's not good enough to just love your kids in the sense that you protect and provide for them, which is house over their heads. And yeah, daddy will be the one to take care of if an intruder comes in. Then you need to help protect them spiritually, emotionally, intellectually. And part of that means taking responsibility that if you're going to have that conversation with your child, one, Think about what you're going to talk about. If you got to do a little bit of research beforehand, if you got to do a little studying up on this, then do it. When they start to have questions, also be honest and truthful, which is to say that when your child says, is this what happened or is that what happened? You can say, yes, sweetheart, this is what happened. This is why they think it's going on. If they have something that you don't know about, you say, you know what? It's really good. I don't know. Let's look at this. Yeah, let's research. Let's try to figure this out. That's a big thing that I did with my kids that I look back now and I say, okay, when we're going to research a particular topic, let's not take for granted the first thing that comes out to us. Let's look at this and let's test it against scripture. Let's test it against logic. Does this make sense? Let's look at a couple of other perspectives from this and try to understand why things are going on. I think teaching your kids to be able to look at things from different perspectives is incredibly important to critical thinking. And so the more that you do this, now again, with their 5, they're not fully comprehending this. That's why, allowing them to talk it out and go through what they're dealing with is really, really important. And also understanding how your kids process things differently. I have 3 kids. They process things differently. They think about things differently sometimes. And that's why it is so important to be able to sit there and ask questions before offering solutions. Because if you don't, you can be prescriptive all day long, but if they haven't properly diagnosed the problem, then the prescriptions you offer might not make sense to them. And if they apply it in a way that doesn't work or doesn't make sense, they start to question whether or not you know what you're talking about. So taking some time to make sure that they comprehend what's going on and then walking them through the process, a lot of times, especially as they get older, helping them come to the right conclusion. Not saying the conclusion is this, but like, what do you think about this? What do you think that response should be? Or how do you think this really engages them and gets them through this critical thinking process and applying their faith and applying scripture to problem solving. That's what you want. You want to set up the process where they're coming to good, logical, biblical conclusions because you've helped them walk them through the process instead of taking the shortcut and being like, think this, do this, believe this. And so that's what I would offer to people as an opportunity to kind of discuss weighty issues like this.
One thing we've always tried to do with sort of evil things that happen in the world is show our children that there's a good side to all the evil in the world. And the most recent one, obviously, was with Charlie Kirk's assassination. I had that experience with my daughter in the room, seeing the news coverage. And then I made it a point to show her the celebration of life in Arizona, whatever it was, a week later, and say, look how many people, there's estimates that it was 1 billion people through streaming or hundreds of millions heard the gospel for the first time. And I asked her, do you think if that evil thing happened that this many people would have been reached with the gospel? With my 8-year-old son, it's a little different. It's like so-and-so player on the Bucks tore his ACL. Well, that gives an opportunity to the next guy down the road, but we got to relate to our kids however we can. Yeah. All right, I'll get you out of here on this, Nick. If you could guarantee one thing for the next generation, whether it's spiritual, cultural, political, what would it be? And what sacrifice would you be willing to make for it?
So obviously, I mean, the easy answer to this is I want people to come to Christ, right? And for that, I would sacrifice everything up to and including my life. So that's the easy answer for this. If we're looking for something, something that doesn't require everybody to, die to achieve a potential end state, it would really, I go back to reclaiming your educational authority over your child's life. Because right now, again, we've talked about this before. We're seeing a revival. We're seeing young men want to go into the church. We're seeing so many things that are positive. And the question we got to ask ourselves is, why did it take this? And I think if parents think very, very hard about this, what they're going to realize is that a lot of the institutions that they grew up with that they could trust when they were younger are not the same institutions they are sending their children to. Period. The end. I am so tired of people telling me that I'm blowing this out of proportion. I sit on the education committee in the Virginia House of Delegates. I have chaired the subcommittee for higher education. I have done a lot of research into what is going on in your kids' curriculums, what's happening in their public schools, what's happening in their universities. And if you don't think there is a concerted effort to turn your kids away from your values and away from your faith, you are not paying attention. And don't respond to that with, well, I know my kid's second grade teacher and she's what I'm sure she is. Is that the only teacher they're going to have? Right? Did she pick the curriculum for your kids? Did she pick all the other students that are surrounding your kids? Did she hand your kids a smartphone or did you? Right? No more. No more. You don't get to feign ignorance because it was different when you went through it. Too much has changed. Now that can be a little bit terrifying, but I don't want you to terrify and I don't want you to despair. And this is where the sacrifice comes in. What I'm telling you is like, look, if you find yourself in a situation where financially you just can't do it, you can't homeschool or you can't take them out of an educational institution, which is actively working against you as a parent. Okay, but you're just going to have to invest a lot more time when they're at home. There's no getting around it. You can delegate authority for educating your child. You can't delegate responsibility. You're responsible. Now, the good news is that my wife and I, we made this decision very early on that when we started having kids, we were going to survive on one income. Please believe me when I tell you, having all three kids, grown up, been educated at home, out in the world, doing their thing, there is not one vacation. There is not a nicer house. There is not a bathroom remodel. There's not a nicer car, a piece of jewelry. There is nothing that I envy from somebody else that even could come close to the relationship that I have with my children and the absolute joy and relief that there is to see your kids strong in their faith, responsible, the sort of adults you just can't wait to be around, that you can now consider not just your children, but you legitimately your friends, right? There is nothing that compares with that. It is one of the greatest joys you will ever see this side of heaven. And so, yes, there will be some sacrifices involved. You will not be able to have as nice of things as if you did with two incomes in most cases, right? But oh my gosh, it's no comparison, man. It is just no comparison. So, yeah, that's what I'd say.
That was a mic drop moment, but I lied. I have one more question, and it's probably the most important question of the episode, and I will get you out of here on this.
Yeah.
What's the next mug, man? Like, what's the unreleased mug that's going into production?
Oh, I don't know. We'll have to think about that. We definitely have some ideas, and honestly, we have a lot of people. So we have our Making the Argument podcast, and then on that we also have our Community and Circle, and we're closing in on, I think, just over 5,700 people in there. And so a lot of the people in our community, they give us ideas for mugs, and we got a lot of very, very creative, very talented people out there. And so we'll definitely we'll probably do another husband-wife mug around Valentine's Day. I think we got some clever ones coming out around Christmas and stuff like that. So we got some more snarky and playful mugs coming out here soon.
Well, where can everybody find you? You've mentioned your podcast. Mention them again. You have 1.7 million followers on Instagram, so I don't know how many more you could get, but where can we find you?
If you just go to Nick J. Freitas, so across all of our social media platforms, whether it's YouTube, Rumble, X, everything's just Nick J. Freitas. You go search for that. You can find us everywhere. And then the two shows that we do right now are Making the Argument and the Y Minutes. That's another area to find us in.
Nick, man, really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for everything you do.
We the people, why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. How they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Garcia, so that's no excuse.